My name is Cynthia Cook, and I'm the president of the Town of Clinton Historical Society. And we are delighted to be partnering with the Mountaintop Historical Society in this program, which is so appropriate for Women's History Month, right here in the first day of the month. I think we're just prescient. But before I just give a couple of little announcements. And then I'm going to turn the program over for so many announcements or whatever our partner, Adrienne Laris, might want to say. But before that, I just want to remind our members that next month we return to the Creek Meeting House, which has been under construction. We will go back and we will have the annual business meeting and potluck supper there on April 5th, the first Friday.
Unmute yourself.
And then May 3rd, we will have an interesting program on samplers made by Dutchess County schoolgirls in the early 19th century by Stacy Whitaker. And then June 7th, a program on carriages and sleighs in the Hudson Valley by a sleigh and carriage collector, Richard Leahy. So we have a lot that we're looking forward to, but let me thank the people on our side and certainly involved with the Mountaintop Historical Society. First of all, I want to thank Adrienne Laris for partnering with us, and Johanna Titus of her organization, who have worked really hard with Elliot Werner and Bob Schock, who are our program peers, and Kathy McMahon, who handles our website, our publicity.
I'm gonna
and
video off.
and helps get the word out very well. So I thank that team of 4 people who worked hard together.
Oh my goodness.
Is there a way we can mute people?
Yeah, please mute everyone.
Everybody, please mute yourselves.
The screen, brother.
I'm going to mute everybody, and then the speaker, Cynthia, Johanna, and Adrienne can unmute themselves.
Okay. All right, I'm back.
Okay.
And, so anyway, I just wanted to extend my thanks to the people that made this program possible, because it's a lot of work, and I think everybody should know that it takes a village to do a program for the Historical Society, and we have a nice little team in Elliot, Bob, Kathy, and this month Johanna Titus, who brought this together. But now, Adrienne, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Well, you're muted.
Very, very good. Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you so much to the Town of Clinton Historical Society. We're delighted to partner with you in this program this evening, and are looking forward to Nancy Siegel's presentation, since both Johanna and I have seen Nancy in person at the Albany Institute of History and Art. Just a brief word about the Mountaintop Historical Society, or MTHS, as we refer to ourselves, as we were founded in 1973 and are located in the heart of the Northern Catskills in Haines Falls at the top of the famed Catterskill Clove, the much painted subject of Hudson River School artists. Our mission is to discover, preserve, interpret, and share the unique history of the Catskill Mountain region. We have a 50-acre campus. We are the home of the 1913 Ulster and Delaware train station. On the National and State Historic Registries. We have a visitor center and an archive that contains some 7,000 artifacts. The western trailhead of the 1.5 Catterskill Rail Trail, a section of the Hunter Area Trail Network, starts on our campus and leads to the Catterskill Falls viewing platform and all the trails at North-South Lake State Park. Many of our programs follow our signature approach and combine history with hiking. I bid a special welcome to the MTH members and friends who have joined us this evening. It's great to have you. I'd also like to thank Johanna Titus for making the arrangements with the Clinton Historical Society. And we're very pleased and look forward to Nancy's presentation. So back to you, Cynthia.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. So now to the reason that we've all gathered together, and that is to learn about Susie M. Barstow, an unknown to me until I heard Nancy Siegel speak at the Hudson River Valley Institute at Marist. So where she's obviously making her way around the Hudson Valley. And when I heard her speak, I thought, oh, the Historical Society should know about Susie Barstow. And so from our point of view, and also, you know, there was a recent article in the Hudson River Valley Review about Susie Barstow by Nancy Siegel. So this is great to have Nancy with us this evening, and I want to give an introduction because she's very interesting. I've been reading her bio on the Towson University website. She's a professor there of art history and culinary history at Towson University in Maryland, and she specializes in two, it seems to me, different kinds of things, but they're linked by women. One, American landscape studies, underrepresented women artists of the 19th century, print, culture, and culinary history of the 18th and 19th century. So that's a really interesting intersection there. And as I said, I first heard her speak at Marist, Hudson River Valley Institute. You should know she's also curating an exhibit which is growing out of her book, Susie M. Barstow, Redefining the Hudson River School. And it complements an exhibit, I guess, that's running now at the Thomas Clark National Historic Site. She can tell us more about that on Women Reframe the American Landscape, Susie Barstow and Her Circle. This builds on her 2010 exhibition, Remember the Ladies, Women of the Hudson River School. And she's also co-curating in 2025 an exhibition called Curious Taste, The Appeal of British Satire, and she's completing the manuscript Political Appetites, Revolution, Taste, and Culinary Activism in the Early Republic. So she's very busy. That is likely to be made into a documentary for PBS. She has a very distinguished list of publications. I encourage you to look her up on the Towson University website and get to know her, because I think her work is very interesting for all of us. But without further ado, I am now happy to introduce our guest speaker, Nancy Siegel. Thank you and welcome.
Great. Cynthia, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here with you this evening, and I'd like to thank Elliot and Bob and Kathy and Cynthia and the Clinton Historical Society and the Mountaintop Historical Society for this very kind invitation to speak with you tonight. Get myself together here. I'm so pleased to bring your two societies together, and I hope this leads to future collaborations. This evening, on the first day of Women's History Month, I'd like to bring your attention to an important artist of the Hudson River School, Susie Barstow. Recognized for her artistry and achieving great fame in her day, Barstow was all but written out of modern history, yet is now the subject of a monographic study, Susie M. Barstow, Redefining the Hudson River School, and excuse the shameless plug, in addition to her first retrospective in a two-part exhibition, Women Reframe American Landscape, Susie Barstow and Her Circle, and Contemporary Practices, which opened at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site in Catskill, New York, in May of 2023, and is currently on view at the New Britain Museum of Art until March 31st, before the show travels to the Woodson Museum in Wausau, Wisconsin in May. Here, Barstow is situated among a number of her female colleagues who consider and reframe the American landscape, creating a symbiotic conversation between past and present. By way of context, in 2010, I curated the show Remember the Ladies, Women of the Hudson River School with Jennifer Krieger, the first exhibition devoted exclusively to these 19th century artists. Since that time, there's been tremendous interest in such women from scholars, museums, and collectors. It remains important that we continue to redefine the Hudson River School with greater inclusivity, because for almost 2 centuries, Thomas Cole, the founding father of the first American School of Painting, as he is often labeled, has come to personify the Hudson River School. But what about the founding mothers? Recent scholarship has provided us with an increased awareness of the breadth and depth of the numerous artists who, like Cole, explored and painted the American landscape from the 1820s to the end of the 19th century. In fact, by the middle decades of the century, increasing numbers of women not only aspired to paint professionally, but also achieved personal and financial success as artists, resulting in part from broader educational curricula, the instruction they acquired at home and abroad, and passionate determination to experience nature's wonderland directly. Among the professional landscape painters at mid-century who hiked, sketched, and exhibited their work were the artists Julie Hart Beers, Sarah Cole, Charlotte Buell Coleman, Eliza Greatorex, Mary Josephine Walters, and Laura Woodward. A common theme uniting them was Susie Barstow, whose landscape showcased picturesque qualities, a romantic sensibility, and well-balanced compositions, earning her fame and prominence in her day. Barstow and her female colleagues, painting in the style of the Hudson River School, routinely traveled to immerse themselves in American scenery. They wrote poetically of their adventures and captured on canvas the beauty and awe they encountered out of doors, inspired by the landscape, just as were Thomas Cole, Asher Durand, and Frederick Church, the male canon of the Hudson River School. These 19th century women artists, including Barstow, shared not only a deep engagement and a sense of place within the natural world, but also an assertion of their place within an art world that all too often failed to offer the same opportunities and visibility to female artists as their male counterparts. The professionalization of their careers situates these women among the many whose lives and creative practices necessitate a redefinition of who and what the Hudson River School was and is. In recognition of the 100th anniversary of Susie Barstow's death in 1923, I'd like to take you on a deep dive into her art and life. Susie Moore Barstow, was born on May 9th, 1836, to Mary and Samuel Barstow, a well-established tea merchant in Lower Manhattan. Named after her paternal grandmother, Susie, the middle child, lived with her siblings Anne and Elijah in a series of brownstone buildings owned by their father in Brooklyn, New York. After attending the Rutgers Female Institute in 1853 and the Cooper Union in 1861, Barstow began exhibiting her work in her 20s and joined the important art organizations of her day, such as the Cosmopolitan Art Association. The early style of Barstow's paintings can be characterized as that of the Hudson River School, romanticized, site-specific compositions with secluded depictions of nature's beauty. Barstow became a markedly successful artist whose acclaim and talent did not go unnoticed. In her day, she was recognized continuously in the press as a professional artist, exhibiting at major venues alongside male colleagues. Artists such as Asher Brown Durand, John Frederick Kensett, Sanford Gifford, Jervis McEntee, and Thomas Moran, and realized comparable prices for her paintings. Barstow's paintings, however, are not the grandiose panoramic visions of Thomas Cole and Frederick Church, which reflected the art market from the 1830s to the 1850s. Theirs was a time of great exploration and nationalism, marked by a quest to situate the deity well within the American landscape. A time when wealthy men were compelled to purchase the largest canvases possible in an attempt to rival the European tradition of art and patronage. Barstow and fellow artists, including Jervis McEntee, Julie Hart Beers, and John William Casselier, for example, were part of the second wave of the Hudson River School, an era after the Civil War in which Reconstruction and economic growth fueled the art market, spurring increased demand for smaller, intimate scenes of the American landscape. Artists such as Barstow responded enthusiastically to this call for parlor-sized compositions from a new and vibrant middle class of collectors, who were eager to adorn their walls with scenes of the Catskills and the green and white mountains with their unspoiled rivers, lakes, streams, and wooded scenery. Landscape as it still existed, seemingly untouched by progress or war, reflecting a nostalgic taste for a more peaceful past. Barstow commanded the physical landscape of the Hudson Valley, the White Mountains, and the rigorous terrain of Yosemite, the Alps, actually any mountain range she encountered that offered stunning vistas and marvelous views, all the while altering her long skirts and hiking garb so as not to be encumbered on these rugged explorations. Susie Barstow was undaunted. Whether traveling alone with friends or sometimes with her students to places of immense beauty, to study, sketch, and commune, it was not uncommon for Susie to hike 8, 10, or 12 miles, only then to sit down and commence with the task at hand, to capture in detailed studies on paper or canvas the wondrous charm she encountered out of doors, inspired by the natural environment. Well-read, well-educated, and well-traveled, Barstow was a notable figure in the field of American landscape painting. A darling of the New York press, she was interviewed often. She published her ideas about the value of experiencing nature directly and lectured widely on the topic. In a lecture on the American landscape, Susie recalled details from a visit to the Catskill Mountains. Quote, "When I was a child, I visited the Catskill Mountains. As we saw them from the river on a hazy summer afternoon, they lay like a delicate cloud, so delicate and dreamlike that it seemed as if a breath would blow them away. I hardly dared to look away from them, fearing they might vanish. As we approached, their forms became more distinct, but always vapory and unreal, seeming to belong to another world than the river and its wooded shores and villages." Barstow felt incredibly at home in the woods or in the mountains or by the lakes and ponds and rivers that she explored. In many ways, her practice of leaving her travel companions to tramp, climb, and sketch alone reinforces the power that solitude held for her personally and artistically. In a recently discovered letter, Barstow includes a sketch of a dead tree with a rickety ladder that she and her female hikers climbed to witness Catterskill High Peak. Unfazed by the potential perils of falling to the ground, Barstow wrote, "I found it easier than I expected, and when I reached the top, was repaid by a magnificent view all around." The prime of Barstow's career occurred between the 1870s and the end of the 19th century. Artistically, a span of time in which scholars have claimed the Hudson River School had fallen out of fashion, with more avant-garde European influences being favored. Barstow, however, understood popular taste, and her painterly style evolved continuously across the 19th century. Her studies of waterfalls and mountain views are breathtaking for their atmospheric accuracy, reflective of her interest in John Ruskin's philosophies regarding the truthful depiction of nature. And Barstow's studies suggest her knowledge of the pre-Raphaelite penchant for precise botanical forms. Likewise, Barstow's style evokes the influence of Barbizon artists such as Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot and Charles-François Daubigny. Their direct observation was complemented with sentiment, softer lines, and more diffuse forms. Exploring changes in atmospheric conditions, these French artists produced immersive landscapes, moody and romantic compositions that capitalized on a spiritual communing with nature. Barstow was enormously influenced by their work, and by the paintings of Corot in particular. She kept newspaper clippings examining her studio methods in her paint box, which was filled with supplies that included camel hair brushes, porcelain palettes, watercolors, and white flake pigment. Barstow maintained a profound ability to command the rugged beauty of nature as found in the American landscape. Hiking, climbing, and sketching in the Catskills and the White Mountains filled her days, months, and years. She was drawn to climb peaks and explore valleys as part of her ever-curious and passionate determination to become the best painter possible. While Susie was documenting the wondrous sights from her excursions, the Northeast, from the Catskills to the mountainous areas of New England and up to Maine, had become a tourist destination, and Susie was eager to partake. In the Catskills and White Mountains, fences were erected, paths were laid, and maps drawn. Hotels were built, providing all the comforts of home, plus excursions, lawn tennis, and cocktail hours. Guidebooks were published annually, offering descriptive advice on important and interesting sites to explore, as well as providing clothing recommendations for both men and women. Barstow would travel to the Catskills for decades, as it was one of her favorite locations in which to hike and sketch, and her adventures were well noted in the press. Quote, Miss S.M. Barstow left last Thursday for a few weeks outing in the Catskills. She will penetrate far into the forest primeval and secure treasures that a more timid worker loses by not venturing into the depths of the woods. In fact, by the 1880s, multitudes of women were climbing, hiking, riding bicycles, and exercising more than just their minds. Numerous publications aimed precisely at the lady traveler, instructed her on how best to make arrangements, what to bring, what to wear, where to eat, how to find lodging, whom to avoid, whom to seek out, and so on. For the intrepid traveler of the latter half of the 19th century, assistance was a mere turn of a page away. With regard to the clothing associated with hiking and climbing, Barstow would have to contend with petticoats, bustles, trains, corsets, and crinolines. Over the course of her lengthy career, she witnessed astounding changes in women's bust lines, waistlines, and hemlines. From the 1850s to the early 20th century, health reformers, progressives, and women's rights activists would have much to say about femininity, idealized forms, and freedom from costume restraints. Barstow's choices in fashion greatly impacted her ability to hike with greater ease. In fact, her timing was ideal. As she was beginning to venture forth in the 1850s, advocates for women's health had begun to praise increased exercise out of doors. This prompted reformers such as Amelia Bloomer to popularize the trouser, or bloomer, to be worn with a short skirt for easier movement during calisthenics, despite the ire from certain men and women who equated, quote, dressing male with a threat to womanhood and femininity. Bloomers of the 1850s became part of a broader undergarment reform in the 1860s after the Civil War. Long, heavy skirts, petticoats, stockings, uncomfortable heels, and layers of binding undergarments hindered mobility for hikers such as Barstow. But shorter skirts and trousers, instead of petticoats, offered numerous choices for greater comfort and safer navigation of rocky terrain. In 1877, Mrs. W.G. Nowell wrote Mountain Suits for Women for Appalachia, a journal created for the Appalachia Mountain Club, to which Barstow belonged, in which Nowell advocated shorter walking skirts. Quote, during the past few years, ladies who are fond of pedestrian tours have found that their ordinary street costume is not adapted to country roads. To make themselves more comfortable, many now wear a plain, untrimmed skirt a few inches shorter than the regular street dress. This is very well, and if worn with proper underclothing, is all that is needed for road walking. The thought was that by making adjustments to under, not outer garments, a woman's public appearance would remain unaltered. Although most women opted for more traditional fashion, the rational dress movement was built on the premise of comfort, ease, better hygiene, and overall health. Variations and modifications to undergarments were continuously explored to the end of the 19th century and beyond, with many women making perhaps slight modifications, such as shortening one's skirt or applying rings to lift one's hemline when needed. Nowell concluded with regret, no wonder that gentlemen have been shy in asking us to accompany them in their explorations. For in our ordinary attire, we must lag far behind, while they toil on ahead with double burdens, theirs and ours. Our dress has done all the mischief. For years, it has kept us away from the glory of the woods and the grandeur of the mountain heights. It is time we should reform. Consider this walking dress worn by Susie Barstow. Visible in this tintype are two layered skirts adorned with pretty trim, with flowers tucked daintily in her waistband. With her hat and long walking stick, Barstow appears the figure of capability and modernity, prepared to traverse any mountainous terrain that might lie ahead. Thusly, when Winslow Homer painted In the Mountains of 1877, The large brimmed hats, walking sticks, long coats, and skirts indicate that Homer was clearly captivated by the image of female hikers and duly impressed by their stamina to reach the summit. Climbing costumes varied, but the determination and fortitude required of women who traversed the American landscape was unwavering. Throughout her long career, Barstow maintained a number of studios in Boston that were certainly well known to many. One in particular was characterized as Miss Barstow's, quote, dainty little studio. Barstow frequented the Catskills, the Adirondacks, the White Mountains, and the lakes and mountains of Maine for inspiration. She made multiple excursions abroad to study art in Britain, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy, as well as a trip around the world in 1901 to Japan, China, India, and Egypt with her partner, Florence Nightingale Thallen, a fellow artist with whom she frequently lived and traveled for nearly 2 decades. Susie was also an inveterate hiker. The 1889 issue of the White Mountain Echo noted that Barstow had climbed up to 110 peaks, including, quote, all the principal peaks of the Catskills, Adirondacks, and White Mountains, as well as those of the Alps, Tyrol, and Black Forest, often tramping 25 miles a day, and sketching as well, often in the midst of a blinding snowstorm, end quote. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle repeatedly characterized Barstow as, quote, one of the best-known Brooklyn artists. And when she died on June 12, 1923, at the age of 87, she was described in her obituary as, quote, a prominent landscape artist whose paintings were her wide renowned, and as a woman of keen intellectual attainments. Having lived a lifetime spanning 2 centuries, Susie Barstow witnessed a vast array of political upheaval, scientific advances, cultural events, celebrations, and American progress broadly defined as part of a changing world. As a young woman, she lived through the Civil War and later the First World War. She benefited from the development of pasteurization, the washing machine and the sewing machine, and watched as New York streets converted from the horse and carriage to trolleys and then to the automobile. She experienced a shift from the telegraph to the telephone, and Edison's invention of the phonograph and the electric light bulb. Barstow attended Chicago's Columbian Exposition in 1893, making watercolor sketches and saving her entrance tickets as souvenirs. She observed the myriad means by which motion and sound advance in exciting ways. The roller coaster at Coney Island, the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk in North Carolina, the escalator, and talking motion pictures. The Museum of Natural History, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Public Library, and the Brooklyn Museum of Art were all created during Susie's lifetime. And of great importance, Barstow lived long enough to celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment on August 18, 1920, which gave women the constitutional right to vote. What an incredible time in which to live and paint. Exceptionally prolific and undaunted by barriers of geography or gender, Barstow lived a life that many could envy. She was independent of thought, outspoken with regard to artistic opportunities and education for women, deeply engaged as a woman of faith, and a supporter of both social and philanthropic causes. She was by all accounts a joyful and energetic figure and remained relevant in the ever-changing art world of the later 19th and early 20th centuries. Barstow outlived the older guard, Durand, McEntee, Bierstadt. She maintained a genuine love for experiencing the landscape in all its wondrous forms and seasons, and she traveled to the farthest reaches of the world in search of nature's beauty, hoping to find foreign landscapes, as Barstow would opine, quote, as beautiful as the Catskill woods. Hers was a remarkable life and career. By all accounts, Barstow's artistic legacy was well established at the time of her death in 1923, yet within a mere few decades, her achievements and reputation, along with those of fellow women artists, were written out of history. In an unexplainable moment of art historical amnesia, the works by these artists failed to be included in exhibitions on American landscape, and with very few exceptions, were all but forgotten in catalogs, monographs, and collected essays. This historical bias against their abilities found its way into scholarship well into the 20th century. But who were some of Barstow's colleagues? Beyond their supporting roles as wife, sister, niece, and daughter, these are talented and accomplished landscape artists who deserve increased scholarly attention. Working on plein air or in their studios, they captured on canvas the beauty and awe they experienced out of doors. They exhibited their work at the National Academy of Design, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, the Boston Athenaeum, to name but a few of the prestigious venues in which their work was shown. All of the works that I will show you are now part of Women Reframe American Landscape. And if you can, please do visit the exhibition in New Britain before it closes. Julie Hart Beers began her artistic career studying with her brothers, James McDougall Hart and William Hart. She spent a great deal of time hiking and sketching in the Catskill, Adirondacks, and White Mountains. An accomplished painter, she took her students to sketch directly from nature, much as Barstow did. Scenic landscape of the Catskills provides a bucolic summer's day, anchored on the right by a spreading birch tree, complemented with cattle cooling themselves in the river. Beers's loosening brushstrokes create a scene of languid beauty. Here, the American landscape is on full display. In the manner of fellow artists of this era, the linear crispness of the Hudson River School style blends effortlessly with the more diffuse tonality of Barbizon influences. Similarly, Woodland Streams of 1877 invites the viewer into an intimate, secluded location of peaceful repose. Cattle wander in the meandering stream, which is framed by the bending boughs of trees above. The brushwork is tighter than that of the previous composition, but collectively Beers's landscapes are breathtakingly beautiful and contemplative. With a career just prior to Barstow's success, Sarah Cole, younger sister to Thomas Cole, stands out as an artist of great talent who was instructed in the fine arts, produced paintings and etchings, and exhibited and sold her work through professional venues in the mid-19th century. This view of the Catskill Mountain House, after a version by Thomas, demonstrates Sarah's skill. She often traveled as a single woman via sloops, steamboats, and stagecoaches, which was time-consuming and at times difficult. Sarah often provided Thomas with support and understanding. Their letters often mentioned financial troubles, but Sarah also addressed her brother's concern that he was losing his artistic ability during the summer of 1836, a pivotal time for Cole with respect to his Course of Empire series and the recent death of his patron, Luman Reed. Sarah wrote, quote, "In a little while, you will find that the art will return to you, and that you will return to the art with renewed pleasure. The lights and shadows of this life are like the lights and shadows of your own pictures. The one makes the other more beautiful. And although we have had many troubles, we have not found this life all shadows. It has been now a light, then a shadow, then a light, now a shadow. I really think that your fears of losing your art are groundless." Compassionate words from sister to brother, artist to artist. Charlotte Buell Coleman was born in Waterville, New York, married Elijah Coleman, and moved to Iowa City for life as a frontier wife. But Elijah died within a few years of their marriage, and Charlotte returned to Waterville, embarking on a career as a professional artist. Like Barstow, her style was deeply influenced by the Barbizon artists. Elected an associate member of the National Academy of Design, Coleman remarkably conducted her training, her travels, and her career as a woman almost entirely deaf, navigating mountain ranges and foreign countries, not to mention the late 19th century art world, challenged by both her gender and her hearing ability. Landscape circa 1900, with its prevailing tones of blues and greens, demonstrates the pervasive influence of the Barbizon school upon Coleman's style. One can feel the warmth of the sun as if an ethereal veil of air were cast across the canvas. At the age of 80, Coleman asserted that, quote, "age is no barrier to art," she opined. "I see no reason to keep women from working as successfully as men. Except that, as you know, we women are always being called off to do things no one expects men to do. I believe that home is the place for women except for painters and musicians. If one has a gift like that, she should express herself." Indeed, she did. It was reported that over the course of her career, Coleman painted 1,500 canvases. Where are they all now? Eliza Pratt Greatorex took a studio in the Fifth Avenue building, where she likely studied with James and William Hart and undoubtedly began her friendship with Julie Hart Beers. Greatorex traveled to Rock Enon Springs, Virginia, known after the Civil War for its healing mineral springs and baths. Eliza made numerous sketches, etchings, and 2 oil compositions of this southern vacation destination, including Rock Enon Spring from Sunset Hill. Taken by the scene's stunning verticality, the viewer's eye moves deep into the recesses of nature. The shimmering reflections of light coming from the springs carry one through the framing trees to the dramatic colors of dusk. Greatorex was a prolific exhibitor of her paintings and etchings and was elected an associate member of the National Academy of Design in 1869. Mary Josephine Walters, like Barstow, and ostensibly with Barstow at times, traversed the very terrains of the Adirondacks, northern New Jersey, the White Mountains, and her beloved Catskill Mountains. Her paintings were selected annually from 1864 to 1883 for exhibition at the National Academy of Design, among other venues, where her work sold with great regularity. As for her artistic education, Walters consulted with Asher Durand. In his biography of his father, John Durand stated that of the pupils who worked with Durand Sr., it was, quote, Miss Josephine Walters, whom he often advised in pursuit of her studies. Woodland landscape from the 1870s clearly suggests Durand's influence. In this secluded hideaway, 3 children find shade from the heat of summer under the spreading boughs of the trees. The light casting off the water's edge from the small lake where they're punt, a flat-bottomed boat used to navigate shallow waters, has been stowed and brings the viewer through the framing tree trunks and crisscrossing branches back to a winding path that ultimately leads to a church steeple barely noticeable in the central distance. Lastly, Laura Woodward frequently exhibited her paintings alongside those of Susie Barstow, Julie Hart Beers, Eliza Greatorex, and Mary Josephine Walters. Woodward's paintings were praised by the press for decades. Looking Up Keene Valley Adirondacks has all the hallmarks of the Hudson River School at its apex in the 1870s. Partial to the Adirondacks before her move to Florida in the late 1880s, Woodward celebrates the open fields and vast mountain ranges of the East Coast. Cattle on a winding path and a rustic fence on the right are all signs of benign domestication. In portraying a lovely summer day, foliage in bloom, Woodward often dotted her landscapes with hay bales, shafts of wheat, cows, or deer. As we bring forward the stories of accomplished women landscape painters of the 19th century, such as Barstow, we must challenge, recast, and expand our definition of the Hudson River School. These women confounded societal and domestic expectations to craft professional lives as artists, as inveterate hikers in the mountains, as businesswomen selling their work, and as exhibitors in the academies. They broke ground, literally, hiking through the Catskills and the White Mountains, and fundamentally, serving as stalwart artistic activists, paving the way as the founding mothers of the Hudson River School with messages of perseverance and uncompromising professionalization of their careers. To conclude with a quote from Susie Barstow, I will overcome every barrier to success, and soon with the sun rising above every earthly conflict, make myself a name and position that will influence the whole world. Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. That was wonderful. And such beautiful paintings. I had no idea that they were quite so beautiful.
They really are. Yes, thank you so much.
Stunning, just stunning. I have a painting here in my office, that I've been looking at as you've been speaking. It's unknown, but I see some similarities there. Certainly that flat bottom boat. What did you call that?
A punt.
Punt. Okay. But let us see. Would you be willing to answer questions if people have them?
Absolutely, of course.
I bet we have some. Let's see. How shall we do this? I guess people can just raise a hand on the screen, or we can do the chat system. We have quite a large number here. Okay. Oh, here's a message from Johanna, thanking you very much,
Oh,
Nancy.
Of course, my pleasure.
So do we have any questions or comments? Oh, I see. Harvey Flatt is with us. Hi, Harvey.
Well, thank you, Nancy. That was really fantastic on all the many Hudson River School folks that I know so well. And but I don't know all the women that you were talking about. And so that was a marvelous explanation and rounding out the whole school. It's just wonderful. A very simple question, actually, because you made a lot about her hiking in the Catskills and so forth. Did she ever go into the Gunks, the Shongots, and go to Mohawk Mountain House? Because many of the, a number of our favorite men did, but did she?
That is a fantastic question. I don't have any direct evidence that she did. That's not to say that she wasn't there, clearly.
Right.
So a lot of information that I had access to was from Barstow family descendants who, one, they had no idea that they had such a renowned artist in their family. They just thought this was great Aunt Susie and boy, she could paint. But they had saved tons of photographs and letters and diaries. And so as I was mining those, that's how I created a chronology of where I could trace her path, but I never came across Mohawk Mountain House.
Okay. Yeah, I know David Schuyler and I have, we have checked out some of that, but I don't remember Susan Parsons. So,
yeah, absolutely. And David was such a dear, dear friend, and knew the area intimately, of course.
Yeah.
And I had thought, boy, I think David would have loved getting to know Susie Barstow for sure.
I think so too. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have a question from Robert Titus in the chat, which is, did Susie or any of the others work at Trenton Falls? Trenton.
Yes, as a matter of fact, and in one of Susie's sketchbooks, she has pencil drawings of the area. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Where is Trenton Falls?
Where is Bob? Can he come in? Can he turn on his?
Titus? Rob Titus. Is Trenton Falls up
Trenton
here?
Falls is north of Utica,
Okay.
and it was very commonly painted in the 19th century by these landscape artists.
Hi, Bob.
Hey,
Yes, Teresa. Well, put on your mic. You're muted.
Was their work shown in galleries and sold and on the market?
Yes, absolutely. So Susie Barstow, the other women that I showed you, were showing in the same venues that their male counterparts were showing in. And so the evidence that I found is that Susie's paintings sold for the same comparable prices as those of her male colleagues. So it's astounding, really, that these are artists whose names have fallen out of history when in their day they were receiving as much attention in the press. They were earning their living as professional artists. And so, yes, they were in the galleries. Brooklyn, in the mid to latter part of the 19th century, was an incredibly active art scene, and there were lots of galleries there where these artists were showing their artwork. Absolutely. Yeah, fantastic question. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do you have any theories of why or how that happened? This falling out of fame, out of recognition?
So, right when Susie dies in 1923, and a lot of her colleagues are passing around this same decade or decade next, I really think that what's happening in the intra-war years has a lot to do with a redefinition of domesticity, femininity, roles of women, and this is a point where a lot of their sort of livelihoods were pushed to the side. The idea of, right, when we think about what kinds of improvements were made in the home, things like washing machines, refrigerators, all the ways in which, right, marketing to make a woman's life easier and to stay in the home. And so I think it's part of a story happening within these decades where we see the emphasis on women focusing on their domestic skills as opposed to their artistic skills. And academia, I think, was, very much to blame for discontinuing their stories, but they were right there at the time. Somebody like Susie Barstow never married, she never had children, and so it was easier, right, for her to sort of confound the societal expectations and go off hiking and sketching for weeks and months at a time. And a number of these artists who achieved real great fame and professionalization similarly had that sense of freedom. And so I think that had a lot to do with it. It's remarkable. I mean, I will say there was an article in a journal, a contemporary, so this happened maybe 2 weeks ago, of an editor who was asking me to review an article that was written about the Hudson River School from a historical perspective. And whoever the author was, right, I don't know who it is, had said, well, but there really were very few women. And if they were there, they were on the margins. And I thought, right, and as this, right, Women's History Month, we still have so much work to do. We still have to continue to write this history more accurately and with greater inclusion and diversity.
Absolutely. Yes.
Do you know whether Barstow hung out at Laurel House Hotel above Catterskill Falls? I was reading that that's where the artist stayed. They couldn't stay at Catskill Mountain House. That was too expensive.
Yes,
But his name in his guest book.
Yes, absolutely. And so she and some of her friends from the Appalachian Mountain Club, that's exactly where they would stay. And it was so easy, right? Because the railroad, it was easy to get from New York up into the Catskills, and then you could take the smaller gauge railroad. It was easy to get to these hotels. Absolutely, Laurel House was one of these favored places. And Susie Barstow writes in detail as do her friends, about what the cost was. Susie was notoriously cheap. She ate the same thing every day for years and years. So she would have things like beans one day, stewed oysters. She kept this very, very simple diet. And I think that she wanted to save as much money as she could for her travels, right? So that she could go or take her students with her, up into the Catskills and have these wonderful hiking and sketching trips. But yeah, she absolutely was there. Yeah, thank you.
Do you think she ever painted Catterskill Falls?
Oh, she did. She absolutely did. There was one of the studies I think I showed that was of Catterskill Falls. She was certainly there. Yes, without a doubt. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is that a question, Elliot?
I have a question.
Okay. I think Elliot's trying to, Elliot, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Where would you find most of her paintings today? Or museums, private hands?
Excuse me. So it is a
Galleries?
mix. So there are absolutely a lot of private collections, and I would say the market is hot for Susie Barstow paintings and these other women because of this visibility, which is fantastic. Their works are now being purchased by major American museums. I am routinely working with museums like, let's see, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the New Britain Museum of American Art. The Met just bought a beautiful Julie Hart Beers. So these are now in major museum collections, which is exactly where they should be. Yeah. There's a lot circulating.
So not so much in private hands?
And a lot in private hands, absolutely. So, you know, when I was putting this exhibition together and I was looking for these works, you know, partnering with gallery, with art dealers, was one way for me to have access to private collectors who had these, right? Otherwise, I never would have known that they were in somebody's home. And so, right, it's the sort of split between those that are kept in private hands and those in public collections, and more are becoming part of public collections, which is important. Yeah, thank you.
I see we have two hands up. One is Suzanne Gilbert. Suzanne, why don't you ask your question?
Thank you. Hi, and thanks everybody for this happen. It's so interesting, and it's amazing that there's such a gap in what we were taught in art school and here in the Hudson Valley. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, so I have two questions. One is, you mentioned Susie Barstow's partner.
Yes.
Travel and dwelling in so I would like, if you would, to speak a little more about that. And also, I noticed the her paint box and her brushes and her art supplies, and that's always fascinated me. So two questions about the art supplies.
Yeah.
Where did they come from?
Mm-hmm.
How expensive were they then?
Mm-hmm.
And like Tom Cole and his sister, were there differences in their palettes? Not the actual palette board, but the color, the array of colors in their palettes, because there was a standard palette taught, and I'm wondering if anyone has really looked at the palettes of these female Hudson River painters and compared them to see how they may be different from the male Hudson River painters.
Those are both fantastic questions. So to start with the second part, and in terms of the artist supplies, these were readily obtainable in shops in Brooklyn and in Manhattan. Susie Barstow spent a lot of time in Manhattan, for sure, Lower Manhattan. The palettes were the same. They're buying the same art supplies. And it's a great question that you asked that, because it also goes into a conversation that many were having in the latter part of the 19th century about, was there such a thing as a female line, a female form, right? Did women right, hold a pencil or a brush differently than men? So the idea of gendered line and form was very much a topic of conversation. They were purchasing the same. They were sharing supplies when they're out in the field together. Absolutely. The first question about Florence Nightingale Fallon. So Florence Nightingale Fallon fancied herself as an artist. She was not very good, I have to say. But she and Susie Barstow traveled together for about 2 decades. And Florence Fallon came from a very well-known musical family in New York. And her father, Robert Fallon in particular, was very well off, made a lot of money in music. And so when he died, and then when her mother died, Florence Fallon was inherited an annuity of about $1,000 a year. And that's a lot of money. And so I think things like in 1901, when they traveled the world together, I think Florence's money is what enabled a lot of these excursions together. Florence also built a studio up in Sebago, Maine, which is where Susie spent a lot of time, and which is where the Fallon family spent a lot of time and had land. And so I think that it was that their partnership for so long that Susie really benefited from. There was a large gap in their ages. And after they come back from this trip between 1901 and 1902 around the world, they split. And we don't know what happens. Susie rewrote her will just a few months before she died, and she specifically bequeaths money to friends, and Florence Thallen is not among them. So, you know, there's so much that we don't know, because obviously when people are traveling together, they're not writing those letters, they're having those conversations face to face. So we miss a lot of that information. But their life together was phenomenal. When they were in Florence together, Susie would take off by herself and she would go sketch and hike for, you know, weeks at a time. And she was gone over Valentine's Day, and she left a card for Florence Thallen. And it's the one time, this one example that we have of her professing her love. And it's this incredibly tender and lovely card that she writes for her. So they definitely had a very close relationship. Whether it's intimacy with a capital I or a lowercase I, doesn't matter. I'm not concerned or interested in that part of her life, right? That's the private moments of her life. But I'm thrilled that she had this wonderful friendship that lasted decades, and somebody with whom she could share her joys or her sorrows and travel with and have companionship with. So it's a very rich story between the two of them, and a wonderful and loving relationship for sure.
And we have two questions. I'm inclined to go to Carol before I go to Squirrel. But Carol asks a question about, was Susie independently wealthy? And that seems to play right into what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Susie Barstow's family, her father was a very well-to-do merchant. And so they were certainly part of middle class for sure, upper middle class. We'd call that a middling class. And so she definitely had that benefit growing up, but she sold her works constantly. And so she was able to support herself as an artist. She moved through a number of brownstones in Brooklyn. But overarchingly, I think because she was so frugal with her money, that she was able to live a very comfortable life. And then, of course, when she's with Florence Thallen, I think a lot of that money enabled these trips and spending months at a time up in Sebago, Maine, up at the studio that that was built there for her. And again, these travels to Europe and around the world. So I don't know that I would call her wealthy, because when you look at the records, the probate records after she died, it was not a sizable estate. But she was certainly comfortable by late 19th and early 20th century standards. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And Squirrel, I don't know who you are.
Thank you, Emma. My name's Emma.
Hi, Emma.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That was a fascinating presentation, beautifully done. And I'm very grateful for that you really took some time to explore the impediments of a woman walking in mountains, and what an effort that was. It's not the walk, the garb. And you know, at that time, that piece about conforming to society versus being able to move around, I know that there were people who stepped outside of the bounds of what was considered common within society or appropriate within society. You know, when I first moved to mountains, I actually got snowed in. It used to snow. I got snowed in, and I became fascinated with the Donner Party at that time, and read all the historical documents and thought about what life, and those were even more rudimentary garb that they had on. But I'm wondering if you have found and I'm grateful for, although I don't wear them except for to move snow, polyester works really well. There's nothing like a fuzzy fleece. In any case, I'm wondering if you found any images of these really interesting and forward-thinking women in men's garb in your research as they traveled and traversed not city streets.
Yes, absolutely. And so, right, the controversy really begins with the bloomers and this idea of women donning what looked like, right, pantaloons. And so, right, something like that would have made riding a bicycle so much easier. It would have made riding horses so much easier as opposed to riding side saddle, right, and having to move your gown along with you. So there absolutely are. There are some fascinating engravings, satirical prints that mock women for donning this kind of costume. There are also some really damning discourses in the newspapers of the day that mock women who want to dress as a man. And there's some interesting stories too about that kind of middle of the road, right? So that you could have rings that would lift up your skirt, or for Susie Barstow, for example, using something like a washing clip to sort of pull your skirt up between your legs to create, right, a modified sort of pant. And the idea was that, and they write about this, that they're walking comfortably, and then when they see men along the path, they take that clip off, right? And down comes the skirt. So once again, they have this modest appearance. So they were very aware of the confines of their dress, a desire to make modifications, but also knowing the sort of pressures of society to look and conform, as you said, a certain way. So there's absolutely a lot that's written about this and a lot of visual culture that mocks women who are seen as too progressive in that regard.
We take a lot for granted these days, don't we?
Absolutely. There's a wonderful passage of writing about women who are wearing men's baseball shoes to get around, right? And how comfortable they were in that. I think about when I go hiking myself and how uncomfortable I might be hiking in the summer. Right. And I have, the lightest type of garb possible. So to wear these layers of skirts and these, having your waistline cinched and all of this, I can't even imagine it. Right. And then to create these beautiful, beautiful sketches that turn into these glorious paintings. I'm in awe of these women. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
Thank you so much.
Do we have any other questions? I don't see any, but I do want to thank you, Nancy. This was fascinating, and I'm so glad you were able to do it for our joint group. We were, we were a large group and a diverse group, and I think it really enriched the conversation amongst all of us to have that group together, meeting with you, even though we're obviously by Zoom. But thank you so very much. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure for me. And thank you all for joining, and enjoy Women's History Month for sure.